Well,
good morning. Good morning.
Mr. Spector, thank you very much for your time. Does the G7 still have a purpose?
It's an interesting question. It's one I've been thinking about for the last couple of days while the circus was taking place in that lovely French resort. It has a purpose if the membership and the leaders who gather choose to give it a purpose. If it is simply a place where people talk without resolution, talk without decisions, then you have to wonder. If people reach a conclusion, we're going to do X, then it has some weight.
The agenda going into this summit was to discuss inequality. Coming out of that summit, we are looking at headlines stating that the diplomatic relations with Iran is what essentially dominated that agenda. Does that again speak to the very question I asked at the beginning, that do these people understand the purpose of this grouping?
Well, I would beg to differ with you about the agenda. Part of the agenda very clearly, at least as Emmanuel Macron, the French president, had determined it, was going to be global climate and environmental issues, as well as the liberalization, if possible, of global trade. The problem was that when they got to the environmental discussion, there was one chair that was not filled. And that happened to be the President of the United States' chair. He had chosen not to be in the room for the moment of the discussion of environmental and climate change issues, which spoke to his long-stated objection to international, global, multilateral treaties and accords on climate change.
If Mr. Trump did not see it fit to participate, therefore, what does that say about the conclusions of that summit, given that we're dealing with a world superpower here?
Well, it says there were some troubles, and it says there was certainly some discord, and the Iran issue made it more contentious when the foreign minister of Iran was invited by Macron without necessarily the agreement of the other participants. And it left open the possibility that there might be further discussions between Iran and the United States, or there might not. And as it turned out, apparently there weren't. All of this was taking place with the background of the United States and China differing about whether or not they had agreed to once again discuss their own trade relationship.
Mr. Ramaphosa, is there probably the only African leader participating in this G7 grouping, although we did see other African leaders there, but in particular punting Africa and that Africa is open for investment. Do you think he would have made headway in light of the many other competing interests there?
Well, I think he was probably swimming upstream a little bit. There were far too many other things grabbing attention. Now remember that this is not the G20, which is that larger group of nations in which South Africa routinely has been participating for a number of years. The Ramaphosa visit was a sort of an add-on to the core meetings. There were a number of other world leaders, heads of countries. Egypt's Al-Sisi was there. And Narendra Modi from India was also there.
Rwanda was there.
They were not, however, part of the core group. They were in a sort of an extra bubble, if you will. The problem with South Africa's president's visit for this was, in a way, this was probably not the right audience to make the pitch that South Africa, and by extension Africa, is open for business, come and invest, because these were seven global leaders who were more concerned with a different set of agenda items than whether or not private companies, private businesses should look elsewhere for investment. The problem is that for countries like the U.S. or Britain or France or Germany or Italy, Japan and Canada, governments don't actually decide where companies will invest. Companies make those decisions on the basis of their own calculations about profit and loss, risk and safety, stability and instability. And to say that to the assemblage in Biarritz, that we are open for business, is a nice thing to say, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a company in Chicago or Manchester saying, let's go.
Mr. Spector, I know that we completely have run out of time, but there is the interesting tweet that dominated, at least here, on the home front, when our president couldn't be identified by an Associated Press journalist when he was among other leaders. Quite embarrassing. What did you make of that?
Well, what it speaks to is the insularity of some people who write tweets or news headlines in the United States more than anything else. I mean, to be fair, Cyril Ramaphosa is a pretty identifiable person on the world scene, and it is a little startling that he could not be picked out of a crowd of 5 people by somebody who purportedly knew something about the news. Maybe next time everybody should wear an identifiable name tag or a special necktie, just, with their name embroidered in it.
Brooks Spector, thank you very much for joining us this morning. He is the international relations expert and, of course, associated with the Daily Maverick.